I don't want to waste your time, so there won't be an intro. If there's one thing that pretty much the entire Siege community, both casuals and pros, can agree on, it's the fact that KD doesn't matter. But I disagree. Of course, the title of this video is a little clickbaity. KD as the ratio between your kills and deaths by itself obviously doesn't matter. But let's go one layer deeper. What are the factors that influence your KD? And here, the most obvious one is probably gun skill, right? I mean, if you consistently win your gunfights, that means you get more kills, which increases your KD. But of course, that's not the only factor. It's pretty naive to assume that the outcome of a gunfight is only determined by the player's gun skill. If you have good support players in your team, who, for example, drone out defenders for you, then that obviously increases your chances of winning gunfights. So that's important to keep in mind, and I will touch on that later on. Now, when people are saying that KD doesn't matter, there are usually two different lines of reasoning. The first one is saying that KD is useless because it doesn't accurately reflect gun skill, for example because of the influence of teammates. But the second group, and that's really what I have an issue with, is saying that KD doesn't really matter because gun skill doesn't matter. And that's where I heavily disagree. In fact, if I had to rate the importance of gun skill versus the importance of things like strategy, tactics, and communication, I would say that winning a round in Rainbow is 65% about gun skill and only 35% about everything else. So why do I think gun skill is so important? Well, first of all, the real question is, why do some people think that gun skill isn't important? If you look at the stats, you're going to see that, 95% of the time, the team that won the round did so by getting 5 kills. And well, gun skill is a major factor when it comes to getting more kills than your opponents. So in the end, gun skill matters because it directly influences your win rate. But of course, that's not exactly a convincing argument because it ignores the crux of the issue, right? I think people do accept the fact that there's really only one win condition in Rainbow, getting 5 kills. I mean, think about the reason why you plant the bomb in the first place. You're not doing it to save the world. You're doing it because it makes it easier to get 5 kills. But that leads us directly to the counter-argument. Yes, you need to get 5 kills, but that doesn't mean that you need to win 5 fair gunfights. For example, getting an 8 kill. That requires literally 0 gun skill. Or killing a defender that is trying to defuse the bomb. That also requires only very minimal gun skill. And it's these kind of situations that lead people to believe that gun skill doesn't really matter. Instead, it's strategy, team play, and communication that really matter in Rainbow. But there is a problem here. I think that some people heavily romanticize Siege. And I get it. I would also like to believe that Rainbow is this slow and methodical game where you win by making intelligent decisions. But honestly, that's just wishful thinking. And don't get me wrong, there really are situations in Rainbow where your team play and coordination is so good that even my blind grandma could have gotten a kill. But overall, I think people are overestimating how often something like this really happens. Now, it's kind of difficult to provide evidence for this claim, because it kind of relies on a sample size, and every individual example that I show runs the risk of being called cherry-picked. But I'll show you a few examples anyways. What we've got here is a round between Rogue and MNM of their EUL relegation match. Rogue is defending Garage, and they're playing a fairly standard top floor roam. Corey and CO, and Ace is on top yellow stairs. And here is where the first interaction between both teams takes place. Fonkers is pushing up long desk, and Corey is playing a pixel angle towards long desk. And ultimately, Corey comes out on top. Now, if you pay close attention, you can see Karzeka driving his Echo drone back and forth long desk, so Corey knows that Fonkers is coming, which means that this kill obviously didn't come down to gun skill alone. But I'd argue that even in a situation like this, gun skill still played the most important part. I mean, Corey was holding the angle anyways, and it's not like he used Karzeka's info to pre-fire or anything. So in my books, this is actually a gun skill kill, but that is somewhat debatable. For the next kill in the round, we have to jump ahead quite a bit to a situation in which MNM got map control and Aces is about to go for a flank on Spiral Stairs. And this is a prime example of a gunfight that is decided purely by gun skill. This was literally only about crosshair placement and reaction speed. There was no interference from teammates whatsoever. And now we kind of get to the core of my argument. Looking at this situation, you might say, okay, sure, that was a gun skill kill, but one kill doesn't decide an entire round. But it actually does. Because even the effects of just a single kill will ripple on throughout the round, and in the end, they can create devastating consequences. And that's exactly what you're seeing here. Getting that kill allowed Aces to retake the top floor, which he then uses to drop down into Piano to kill Sledge. And sure, that kill on Sledge didn't require any gun skill whatsoever. But my point is that Aces only got into that position because he won a gunfight earlier in the round. Alright, so looking back at the kills we've seen so far, we have one engagement that arguably came down to gun skill, we have one engagement that definitely came down to gun skill, and we have one engagement in which gun skill didn't play a role. So let's continue with the round. Before Aces even got that kill on Sledge, we see Corey peeking users on Yellow Stairs. And I think there's not much debate here. This kill is just obviously due to gun skill, and the same is true for the next one. We can't really see it that well, but I think it's pretty obvious what was happening. As for the last kill of the round, I'm not quite sure how to classify that. I guess it kind of technically was a gun skill based gunfight, but also not really. In any case, it doesn't really matter that much, because I think the round as a whole showed that gun skill based gunfights are actually pretty prevalent. And I can already see people saying that this just happened because the attackers played poorly. For that Corey gunfight, for example, they could have repelled on CO windows in order to kind of dodge that gunfight. And that is true, but at the same time, it's also exactly the kind of romanticization of Siege that I was talking about. Because in a real round of Rainbow, that is just impossible. You can't dodge every gunfight, and you can't always play 2v1 crossfires. At some point in the round, there's just no other option but to take a gun skill based gunfight. And you're going to see a few of those in every single round that you watch. So yeah, I hope that these examples manage to explain why I think that winning a round is 65% due to gun skill and only 35% due to everything else. Rainbow is quite simply not chess. But for some reason, there seem to be a few people that are kind of in denial about that. What you often see on social media, for example, is the idea that in Pro League, everyone has insane gun skill. So it's strategy and team play that make the difference. But for me, the exact opposite is the case. Everyone in Pro League is aware of the meta strategies. I mean, that's why they are meta. So the difference mainly comes from gun skill. And gun skill is most certainly not evenly distributed among teams. But alright, if you followed my line of reasoning up until now, then we have established that gun skill does in fact matter. So the question is, does that mean that KD matters too? Well, I think that's kind of just up to preference. I personally really believe that it's gun skill that is the most important factor contributing to your KD. So in that sense, yes, I do think that KD matters. But there are a few asterisks here. First of all, your KD is of course influenced by the quality of your teammates. But as I just talked about, I also think that there are a surprising amount of situations that are literally just straight 1v1s without any outside influence whatsoever. But even in the situations where you have a teammate droning for you, I think that a good portion of those are still mainly decided by gun skill. Next, there is of course a problem of roles. If you try to compare the KD of an entry fragger to the KD of a support, you're kind of just comparing apples to oranges. And lastly, there is the issue of gaming the system by saving KD, for example. Of course, that's not that common in Pro League, but it is true that not every kill is worth the same. Some kills are just straight up junk if you consider the impact on the round, but they still increase your KD. That being said, here it's very important to realize that you can't really classify kills as junk just based on the outcome of the round. I mean, if I got 2 important opening kills, but then my teammates threw the round away, then these 2 opening kills don't just suddenly turn into junk kills. So yeah, what I'm trying to say is that KD only really matters if you have the appropriate context. Alright, so that's kind of my take on the whole KD and gun skill discussion. And I'm assuming that some of the things I've said are quite controversial, because the idea of KD not mattering, and to a lesser extent also gun skill not mattering, seem to be pretty popular in the Siege community. So just to avoid any kind of misunderstandings, I want to end the video by recapping my core conclusions and how I got there. First of all, the entire argument is constructed within the framework of Pro League. I'm sure that a lot of what I've said also applies to Ranked, but my arguments are specifically focused on Pro League. The core assumption is that gun skill has a much higher impact on round wins than people might think. Sure, there are rounds that are won while using only minimal gun skill, but in an average round there will be quite a few situations that are decided almost entirely on gun skill alone. So gun skill does matter, and by extension, KD also matters, because in my opinion, gun skill is the biggest contributing factor to KD. That being said, there are a few things you need to consider in order to make KD a meaningful stat. First of all, you can only use it to compare players that have the same role. So you can compare fragger to fragger and support to support, but you can't do any cross comparisons. The second caveat is that when you are comparing players across different teams, you have to consider that having good teammates will naturally boost the KD of a given player. So when comparing KDs, you also have to compare the quality of the entire roster, and then adjust accordingly. But as long as you follow these guidelines, I think that KD does actually matter. Alright, that's it for the video. I'm very much looking forward to all the comments, just to see how controversial the statement really is. And if it turns out to be really tame, maybe I'll make a video about why I think that your rank actually matters. But until then, I hope you enjoyed the video, I hope you learned something new, and thanks for watching.